Hello everyone, my name is Sergey and welcome to the Geek Tech Show. And in today's video we are going to be trying to debunk if the actual space moon landing was real, fake or anything in between. So here we have a small replica of the moon lander from the 1960s. The question is, how is it possible that something this specific and this small had enough oxygen and of course didn't have enough CO2 level built up in it that was able to sustain the entire mission to the moon and back? So if you want to know and learn, find out in this video. Let's start to examine the facts. Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of the Geek Tech Show, and if you do enjoy this video, please make sure to subscribe. There's going to be a link right down below. Over here we do product reviews, examine some conspiracies, and of course a lot of entertainment, online classes, lots of goodies. Make sure you stay tuned. In today's video we're going to be examining, we need to have my examination glasses right on, the following: the Apollo 11 and Apollo 11 moon landing specifically that happened around exactly 50 years ago. So with that being said, we're going to be doing some real examination of the actual landing and finding out if it is real, it is fake, and what do I actually think about. Now, first of all, why do I have this light, you might say? This is actually to prove something very interesting to you. 50 years ago, nothing was made that was this small. Not only lights, computers. Guess what? The computer back then was the size of a huge living room. Huge computers were actually being used. Why is this so important? Well, it is important when we are going to be examining the evidence for the space landing. Before we get started into that, I want to talk about myself. Who am I? What are my qualifications over here except being a YouTuber, an online teacher, and so on? Well, I have a history degree from an accredited United States college, and I actually was certified to teach as a social studies teacher. Now, why is this important? Well, because I'm a history student. I like to examine history and look into it within a special perspective and lens of events. Before we get started into it, something very important about is to have this. What is this? Well, this is called how you examine some evidence. Specifically, what I have here is some data that I'm going to be talking about. And what actually happened with the moon landing? Before we actually landed on the moon, the Soviet Union beat the United States almost to anything. And here it says, I'm going to read the facts right out as they are. First artificial satellite was Sputnik. They beat the United States with that. And this actually happened in 1957. Next thing, first animals to successfully orbit the planet. Belka and Stoika. Right there. Pictures of them. Soviet Union beat the United States once again. First on the moon, the Luna 2 probe right here. First man in space, Yuri Gagarin, Soviet Union again. First woman in space, Yalenka, right here. First spacewalk, Alexei, Soviet again. What is going on here? First remote controlled rover on another celestial body. What is going on here? And from Sputnik to SpaceWorks, the first actual space shuttle, space actual thing that was orbiting was made by the Soviet Union, and the United States is actually still using it. I want to actually put some things here into perspective. The perspective was the Soviet Union back in the day was way more advanced than the United States when it came to anything has to do with space. So the United States had to do some catching up with the Soviet Union, which is actually fair and done. But a few things don't make sense here, and they don't make sense because of just the spell of events the time period, and of course the technology back then. And the first question is, why wasn't the Soviet Union able to pull this off? Although they pulled off 7 forced space things, but they have not been able to pull off putting somebody on the moon. What's going on here? Why was the Soviet Union lacking in the technology to put someone on the moon, and United States was able to beat them, although the Soviet Union beat them in 7 different things before that? What is wrong here with this picture? Second of all, we are talking about 1960s, 1950s. Have you seen anything made back then? Have you seen how prehistoric the computers and everything else was? There was almost no computers back then, period. It was like things the size of a whole living room. Why is this so important? Well, it is important because back then the technology was almost entirely mechanical. And to calculate for something to go exactly 100% right with the Apollo moon mission, to land exactly in space and not have any failures. And we're talking about, let's talk about the NASA huge mistake that they made somewhere in the 90s, where they sent something in orbit to Mars and it crashed just because they used their own matrix unit or something like that. Now, how can they get it all 100% right with humans on board without the whole thing blowing up as a rocket? If you've seen SpaceX, you've seen how many times this thing blew up, how many times they actually had the whole thing blow up. Now we're talking about manned mission. Now we did have the space shuttle go up so many times with United States and nothing happened, just twice it did blow up. But this is 1980s technology that they've been using throughout the 90s to launch missions to space. But the important thing is, of course, getting them from one location to another safely. And you have to have enough oxygen, and enough oxygen for them to be able to pull this off, to fly from one destination to another. But most important is not the oxygen itself. Everything is airtight, which means nothing can get out or in. What happens to all the CO2 buildup? That means that something has to actually suck it all inside and then either convert it back into oxygen or do something with it, just store it. And we are talking about this is going to take such a long time for them to fly over there. And nothing went wrong with this. And in such a small shuttle, a few things don't make sense here. But here is another interesting fact that you probably don't know. Well, when they landed on the moon, you see those beautiful pictures of the astronaut, no dust on them whatsoever. And when it did land, wasn't there some kind of wind? I mean, it looks like so photogenic, like somebody just like snapped and took pictures of them just like sitting there and staging everything up. It just looks too perfect. It looks too good in some ways. And as a photographer, I mean, when I take pictures, I like to stage them. I like to get everything perfectly done. But those guys are not photographers, they are astronauts. And they're using prehistoric film. You're talking about film that is from the 1950s, 1960s, like ancient film that is prone to get mistakes, that is not gonna work. Overexposure or underexposure, you don't even know what you're snapping. You can't even see what you're taking a picture of a lot of times. Who knows what kind of cameras they had back then? Somebody enlightened me on this part here. So that is also important. Also what is important is the fact that the whole mission, why was this happening? Now, let's talk about the space program, something interesting. There was something was called Star Wars in the 1980s. And the Soviet Union knew about Star Wars, and they thought the United States actually mastered the ability to shoot all those rockets that the Soviet Union is going to launch, all those nuclear rockets with lasers. Something that comes from the movie Star Wars. And the whole thing was staged. The whole program was faked. Later on we found out that the Soviet Union was spending all this money trying to destroy a program that the United States have that didn't even exist. Now, why would not United States just come up and create a staged moon landing? Instead of them putting all these resources, putting people on the moon, staging the whole thing was actually so much easier to do. Now, you might say, like, wouldn't people find out right now? Well, I don't think that everybody knew about this. I think just like a handful of people actually knew about the specific part where they were actually going to stage the actually moon landing. So that's probably an NSA files right there. Now, I have no idea about this stuff, and I'm just speculating. This whole thing is like 100% speculative right there. But I'm trying to get you to think just a little bit outside of the box. When you're reading all those historical facts over there, it sounds really great that we landed first on the moon. Now, I really want to see people to land on the moon again. And actually, if all the evidence right there that I actually gave you doesn't sound real, well, here it is, right now. Why are we, 50 years later, have not been able to pull this off again? What is stopping us from just reusing and creating a beautiful space vehicle, flying to the moon and actually getting it done? What is so hard about doing it? What is stopping us? And above all, what is stopping China, Russia, or any other of those countries being able to pull this off unless there is something physically impossible about? Now, the first thing is, the question is, we really don't know if we're going to be putting an actual human on the moon. What's going to happen to the person? I mean, how do we know the exact atmosphere on the moon? How do we know once the human gets out from the space shuttle, he's not going to get sucked into space or something like that? How do we know there is enough gravity there? Now, everything there is just speculative. We have instruments, we have things that measure when you send a probe over there, and yet we don't have an actual human being in a spacesuit walking on the moon to test all this stuff out. Anything that can go wrong is gonna go wrong when you're doing something that is so many miles away. And at the expense of human lives, how many people have to die before we get this thing exactly right? And this brings me to the question of back in the 1960s. How many people did die landing on the moon? What if they did land a few people on the moon and they actually died and they can't actually show you? What if, and this is the biggest what if the whole Apollo 11, the actual landing, did actually happen, but everybody who was on it just died? What actually if that actually happened and the whole thing was they had to actually stage the whole event because what actually happened? So there is no way to know all those facts, and there was an interesting thing. Like somebody told me there was like somebody left a mirror on the moon, so we can go ahead, shine a laser right to it. The question is, did we have lasers in the 1960s that can shine all the way there to bounce it off something specifically? And now, how do we know we are bouncing it off something that we left on the moon versus, and also who left it? It could have been just a moon lander that left it. I mean, how do we know who exactly left it? And now we do have those huge telescopes right now. Why can't we just go ahead and zoom into the moon and see the actual flag that has been planted there by United States? How come there is no pictures of that? So what is going on here? How come there is none of this? None of it is actually there. And let's be talking about interesting facts. Well, including, why did the United States have all those different files that were so important about the moon landing get accidentally deleted, destroyed, and some of them were actually sold off to some intern who bought it for like almost next to nothing if this was supposed to be such important files? Including, where are the actual space rocks samples that have been done and have been taken from the 1960s? Where are those actual rock samples? They can't be found. They have been displaced or something. Now, some of the rocks, space rocks, they actually can be found in some places on the planet too. There's actually the same moon rocks. So potentially speaking, you could actually take some of those moonrocks from this planet and use them as evidence of a moon landing, really. So lots of unanswered questions, and the biggest unanswered one is, well, it is almost 2020. We should be actually landing on Mars, period. And we are not. We are not even close. Our space program actually went down. There was almost no funds in the space program. We are using the Russian-made space program just to go ahead and put our astronauts into the space shuttle space station that has been made by Russia. And this makes no sense. Why are we not putting money, restarting the whole space program? So with all this evidence right in front of you, it begs the question, what is going on here? 50 years later, why are we not back on the moon? And I hope to really hear some educated answers over here and try to prove me wrong, try to tell me what am I missing here? What am I saying here that is not correct? Why all those theories, facts, and everything else, I just put it up front in all of you? Why is this not making sense, or why is it, or why maybe it does make sense after all? Anyways, if you did enjoy some of the content, unique content of this channel, make sure you subscribe right down below. And I will see you in another video of the Geek Tech Show. And hopefully this opened your mind, made you think a little bit different.
We're now looking out the right-hand window of the crater, and there's Masculine W. It occurred approximately 2 to 3 seconds late, and gave us the clue that we would probably land somewhat long.